Hi Internet, welcome back to Trumps to Twilight, the channel where I, Vincent, talk to you about books, movies, music that I enjoy, find interesting, or a combination of the two. Today we're going to be talking pretty loosely about One Battle or Another, the new movie from P.T. Anderson. I'd like to talk about this film and just share my thoughts and opinions about it without trying to give a real structured review or in-depth critique. I would also like to say before we get into it that there'll be spoilers for the first 20 minutes of the film, but not really anything after that. Get kind of generalities out of the way at the beginning. I've never seen a P.T. Anderson movie that I didn't enjoy. Magnolia is not my favorite from him, even though a lot of people really love it. But for me, it has sections that are brilliant. Everything else by him that I've seen is great. And I think I've seen everything he's made apart from Inherent Vice. Now, this movie, One Battle After Another, was apparently based on the novel Vineland by Thomas Pynchon. I've read Vineland. I read it maybe 20 years ago. What I remember about it is that I loved it, that it was really entertaining and engaging in a way that surprised me because I'd always heard that Pynchon was difficult, and up until that point, I'd only read The Crying of Lot 49, which was much more kind of oblique. But it's this huge, sprawling satire of 1980s America. The characters in the book are quite radical. They grew up in the 60s and have a connection to the hippie, anti capitalist, anti Nixon period. And they are now living in the hyper capitalistic 80s where Ronald Reagan is the president. There's a lot of stuff about kind of far left thinking, anarchism, socialism, and there's a lot of stuff about the inherent fascism of capitalist America in that book. And what I remember thinking when I read it was I didn't know that Americans made art that was so honest about American politics, that was so kind of engaging with how the CIA behave internationally, that talked about the deep corruption of the American state. I certainly wasn't prepared to read something like that in the early 2000s when George Bush Jr. was doing the Iraq War and everything. I was like, wow, okay, Pynchon sees America kind of the way that maybe left leaning Europeans see America. And I remember that there is this family that are kind of divided. There's a mother who's trying to get somewhere to rescue her daughter, but can't get on a plane because she won't cross a picket line, because she also grew up with parents who were kind of 1930s and 40s radicals involved in the communist movement and the workers' movement in America. So this idea even that you could have a protagonist with communist parents and communist sympathies who like maybe saw the Rosenbergs as heroes is just like was totally shocking to me at the time when I read it. And I also remember that it had a lot of narrative strands, but I couldn't remember it well enough to know, what the film might be about, like narratively. And when I saw the film, I have to admit that I didn't remember the story of the film. And what I certainly don't remember from the novel is the emphasis on immigration and race that One Battle After Another has. So, One Battle After Another is about a left wing liberation organization called the French 75. The two key protagonists of which, for the sake of the story, are Bob, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, and Perfidia Beverly Hills, played by Tiana Taylor. And also, side note, Jungle Pussy, the rapper, is in the French 75, and she's actually called Jungle Pussy in the movie. So there was a scene where she got up on a counter, and they were robbing a bank, and she was like, I am Jungle Pussy. I was like, hi, hey, Jungle Pussy. That was mad. Anyway, if you don't know Jungle Pussy, check her out, especially if you like kind of smart, playful, rebellious hip hop music. She's very enjoyable. Oh my God, I can't talk in any linear way about this film. Apparently, listening to me is probably like reading Vineland. Anyway, uh, the point is that Perfidia Beverly Hills and her friends, like Jungle Pussy, and them, they are like kind of seem to be based on like black exploitation 70s and 60s and 70s cinema, but the storyline is taking place, I think, around the late 90s or the early 2000s. They're a radical revolutionary group that reminds me more of things that existed in the 60s and 70s, like the Red Army faction, for example, in Germany. And their goal is to liberate people who have been taken into custody by the American Immigration Service. And you might think about like Guantanamo, or you might think about what ICE is doing in America now. So they're going around basically opposing the inherent fascism of the American state. While they're doing these actions, Perfidia Beverly Hills meets a military guy played by Sean Penn who tries to sexually harass her or intimidate her, and she turns it around and kind of susses him out immediately and realizes that kind of he has a kink for black women, and that's also probably related to a kind of interest in humiliation, and she kind of dominates him. So she takes total control of a situation where he's trying to racially and sexually intimidate her. And she talks also about like how she uses her sexuality as a part of her liberational practice and part of her war against state control. But this begins a kind of battle of wills between them where he is able to leverage his position within the American state and the government to basically blackmail her into having a sexual relationship with him, on the agreement that if she does that, he will allow the French 75 to continue with their activities. Ultimately, what happens is that she gets busted, and then he turns up and intimidates her into cooperating, and she rats out the other members of the group. And this is the beginning of the film, and then the rest of the film is kind of about the consequences of this. It goes on 16 years later. Bob, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, is living with the girl who he thinks is their daughter, his daughter with Perfidia. At this point, the military man, Lockjaw, played by Sean Penn, is attempting to join a fascist organization, and he then needs to try to clean up any of his history with Perfidia and try to erase any evidence of this, which includes the individuals in question. So I want to say a couple of things about how I think this film works. Firstly, I don't really want to get into it in depth, but this film looks amazing. It's edited in a way that is totally incredible. I was thinking about the film after I saw it, that there are like several long narrative kind of dances through the film that it's woven together of in a way that like the plotting is quite different from what you're used to in a Hollywood film, but it's so well executed that I think that a mainstream audience could still enjoy it. It also has kind of chase sequences and fight sequences and things that you're used to seeing from action films, but they're done in a way that is more classic. Like it reminded me a little bit of that famous film with Steve McQueen, Bullet, for example. A kind of throwback to an earlier period of cinema where the tension and the excitement is executed from a combination of the narrative elements and the skill of the direction and the use of the score, instead of just like kind of frenetic cutting like we're used to seeing, and like crazy stunts like and CGI like we're used to seeing today. Like all of that stuff is not there. There is one amazing stunt in the middle of this film, but it's so woven into the narrative that it just feels like another kind of incredible beat. But I want to say something about what this film does politically that I think is really interesting, because it retains this sense that Vineland, the novel, has, even though I don't think it's recognizable as the book, retains this sense of talking about America as it really is. Like, this is an America where white supremacist secret organizations exist within finance and overlap with the government and the military to further their own agenda. This is an America where military individuals can use the structures and the organizations around them to cover up their own failings. It's also an America that simultaneously oppresses and harasses and brutalizes minority groups while using them as cheap labor. It's an America in which an intelligent black woman's sexuality can be part of her power and her way of exerting influence on the world around her, but which she will also potentially be punished for, and where it can be turned against her. It's an America where the good guys, so to speak, are radical liberationists, but where they are stymied by infighting, crushed under the pressures of the state, continually undermined, and where, in one hilarious scene, a kind of bureaucratic, nerdy guy refuses to give Bob information because Bob can't remember a password, and where they end up having an argument that is exactly like talking to somebody in customer service. Like, it has this satirical aspect about the weaknesses and the frailties also of liberationists and radicals. It's so funny, like Bob's most insulting term for this guy is calling him a fucking liberal. But there's no doubt about where the real evil lies, and that is in the state apparatus and the brutal oppression of the people who are trying to exert any influence on it, upon it. I'm not going to be that like overly woke friend, but it's kind of weird sitting in the cinema watching Sean Penn and Leonardo DiCaprio play these characters, knowing a little bit about who they are in the real world. Um, but you know, this is art, so it's not like everybody who is in the film needs to share the politics of the artwork. I'd also just like to say before I start rounding off this ramble about the movie that the person who played Willa, who's the other central protagonist of the film, the daughter of Perfidia Beverly Hills, her name is Chase Infinity, the actress. If she isn't going to be huge, then I'll be very surprised. Her performance was so moving and subtle and nuanced and brilliant in this film. I'm going to close this out now, but I want to say that it's really interesting to see this film alongside Eddington by Ari Aster. It's as if those filmmakers in America who are on the line between auteur and mainstream, Aster, P.T. Anderson, are starting to make films that confront the reality of American politics. And particularly Anderson in this film is not just talking about Trump's America, like he's drawing on decades, you know, the Vineland, the story starts in the 60s and they're already like the children of revolutionaries. So we're talking about like 100 years of American history. I don't think there's actually been a time where relatively mainstream, you know, filmmakers who were getting their films into the theaters were making films about this aspect of America. I mean, you might say Three Kings back in the day, but really it's quite an unusual, quite significant phenomenon in my opinion. Have you seen this film? What do you think about it? It's so long and complicated and rich that there were many things I couldn't touch on, but I'll be very grateful if you bring them up in the comments and we can talk more about it. I'd like to thank you for watching this video, and I'll be back later this week with a Halloween video about a collection of spooky stories. Okay, thanks for now. Lots of love.